Come forward. Be quick about it. Stay in the light.
Keep your head down, little one. We'll face whatever comes together.
Okay, I trust you.
The storm did not arrive quietly. It came with a hard northern wind that scraped across rooftops and forced shutters to rattle in their frames. Snow fell thick and relentless, swallowing the road that led into Briar Hollow until it vanished beneath white. Lanterns were dimmed early that evening. Doors were barred. Winter had been cruel enough already, and no one in the village wished to test it further. Inside his small workshop at the edge of town, Rowan Hale fed another log into the hearth and listened to the wind press against the walls. The scent of fresh-cut cedar lingered in the air, mixing with smoke and old memories. Wooden carvings lay scattered across his workbench, unfinished figures waiting for hands that sometimes felt heavier than they should. Rowan lived alone. He had grown used to the quiet. Outside, the storm deepened. Then came the knock. It was not loud, not demanding, just a small, uneven thud against the door. Rowan froze. Travelers did not wander through Briar Hollow in this weather, and no villager would leave their home once snow began falling this hard. The knock came again, weaker. He moved toward the door slowly, pausing only long enough to lift the iron latch free. The wind shoved against it the moment he opened it, driving snow into the threshold. And there, barely upright against the storm, stood a child. Green skin, small tusks, thin shoulders wrapped in a torn wool cloak far too light for winter. The boy's dark eyes lifted to meet Rowan's. "I just need warmth," he whispered. The words were steady, but his body trembled violently. Rowan stared. The war had ended 2 years ago, but its shape still lingered in the faces of those who survived it. He had seen orcs before, across battle lines, in distant hills, in stories told with bitterness and grief. But never like this. Never alone. Snow clung to the boy's lashes. His lips were cracked from cold. One of his boots was missing entirely, his bare foot red and numb against frozen ground. "I won't steal," the boy added quickly. "I won't cause trouble." The simplicity of it struck harder than accusation ever could. Behind Rowan, the fire crackled warmly. Behind the boy, the storm howled without mercy. Rowan stepped aside. "Come in," he said. The boy hesitated, as if expecting the door to close at any second. Then he crossed the threshold. The warmth hit him immediately. He swayed, nearly collapsing before Rowan caught his shoulder. Beneath the thin cloak, his bones felt too sharp, too light. Rowan shut the door firmly against the wind. Snow melted rapidly from the boy's hair, dripping onto the wooden floor. He did not move toward the fire without invitation. He simply stood, arms wrapped tightly around himself. "What's your name?" Rowan asked. The boy swallowed. "Kieran." Rowan gestured toward the hearth. "Sit." Kieran lowered himself carefully onto the rug near the fire, hands extended cautiously toward the flames. His fingers were scraped and raw, knuckles split in places as if from long travel or harder survival. Rowan crouched across from him, studying the child quietly. "You're far from the northern lands," Rowan said. Kieran nodded faintly. "There's nothing there now." Rowan did not ask what that meant. Instead, he moved to a small cupboard and returned with a bowl of broth left from his own supper. He handed it over without ceremony. Kieran accepted it with both hands. He did not devour it greedily. He drank slowly, carefully, as if afraid it might disappear. Outside, the storm battered the village, but inside the workshop, the fire burned steady. Rowan noticed bruises along Kieran's forearm, old and new. Dirt beneath his nails. Exhaustion layered over something deeper. "Where are your parents?" Rowan asked gently. Kieran stared into the fire. "My mother didn't wake up after the cold," he said. The words were flat, not dramatic, just true. Rowan felt something tighten in his chest. "I walked south," Kieran continued. "People close doors when they see me." Rowan glanced toward his own door. He could imagine the whispers already forming if anyone had seen the boy enter. The village remembered the war. It remembered loss. Fear did not vanish because treaties were signed. Kieran shifted slightly closer to the hearth. "I don't need to stay long," he said quietly. "Just until the storm passes." Rowan looked at the thin shoulders, the missing boot, the quiet resilience in the boy's posture. Warmth. That was what he had asked for. Rowan stood slowly and walked toward a wooden chest near the back of the room. He opened it and removed a thick wool blanket, worn but intact. He draped it over Kieran's shoulders without comment. The boy stiffened at first, then relaxed. Outside, snow piled higher against the door. Inside, something had already changed. The storm would pass by morning. But what Rowan had allowed to cross his threshold would not be so easily undone. And though Kieran had asked only for warmth, the night had already begun to offer something greater. By morning, the storm had buried Briar Hollow beneath a thick, blinding white. Snow clung to rooftops and bowed the branches of trees low toward the earth. Smoke rose cautiously from chimneys as villagers stepped outside to shovel paths and check fences. It did not take long for someone to notice the unfamiliar footprints leading to Rowan Hale's workshop at the edge of town. Footprints smaller than a man's. Bare in one place. Too narrow to be human. Inside the workshop, Kieran slept near the hearth, wrapped tightly in the wool blanket Rowan had given him. His breathing was slow and even now, exhaustion finally overtaken by safety. The missing boot lay near the fire, drying beside a pair of thick socks Rowan had set out before dawn. Rowan stood at the window, watching shapes move through falling flakes. He knew what would come. A knock sounded mid-morning, firm, deliberate. Rowan opened the door to find Marta Feld, the baker's wife, and two others standing just beyond the threshold. Their faces were tight with cold and something else. "We saw tracks," Marta said without greeting. Rowan did not deny it. "There was a child in the storm," he replied evenly. "I let him warm himself." "An orc child," one of the men corrected sharply. Inside, Kieran stirred at the sound of voices. His eyes opened slowly. He did not rise, but his shoulders tensed beneath the blanket. "He's alone," Rowan said. "They're never alone," the second man muttered. Rowan stepped slightly to block their view inside. "He is." Marta peered past him anyway. Her gaze landed on the small green figure near the fire. "He'll bring trouble," she said quietly. "You know that." "He brought frostbite," Rowan answered. "And hunger. That's not our burden." Rowan's jaw tightened slightly. A freezing child is everyone's burden. The men exchanged glances. "You remember what happened at East Ridge?" one pressed. Rowan remembered. He remembered smoke. He remembered letters that never reached home. He remembered burying what little returned. "I remember," he said. "Then why risk this?" Marta demanded. Rowan looked back at Kieran, who now sat upright but silent, eyes fixed on the floor. "Because he knocked," Rowan said simply. The words seemed to frustrate them more than anger would have. Marta exhaled sharply. "The council will want to speak about this." "They can," Rowan replied. "And if they ask you to send him away?" Rowan did not answer immediately. Inside, Kieran lowered his head slightly, as if bracing for familiar outcome. Rowan turned back to the villagers. "He stays until he can stand on his own without freezing." "That's not your decision alone," one of the men warned. "It is for my door," Rowan said calmly. Silence stretched in the cold air. Finally, Marta shook her head. "You're inviting division." "I'm refusing cruelty," Rowan replied. They left without further argument, boots crunching sharply against packed snow. Rowan closed the door slowly. Kieran did not look up. "I can go," the boy said quietly. The storm stopped. Rowan walked back toward the hearth. "And freeze tonight?" he asked. Kieran shrugged faintly. "It wouldn't be the first time." Rowan crouched in front of him. "Why didn't you go north?" Rowan asked. "There's no one left," Kieran said. His voice did not tremble. It simply carried emptiness. Rowan studied the boy carefully now, not as symbol, not as remnant of war, but as child. The bruises, the thin wrists, the exhaustion masked by stubborn pride. "Did you steal anything before coming here?" Rowan asked. Kieran shook his head immediately. "No." Rowan believed him. "You asked for warmth," Rowan said. "You didn't demand it." Kieran hesitated before asking, "Is that wrong?" "No," Rowan replied. He stood and moved toward his workbench. From a shelf, he took a small wooden carving, unfinished, smooth where it had been shaped, rough where work had stopped. He placed it in Kieran's hands. The boy examined it cautiously. "It's just wood," Rowan said. "But you can turn it into something." Kieran looked up. "Why?" he asked. Rowan considered that. "Because warmth fades," he said. "But what you build stays." Outside, the village whispered. Inside, a different kind of fire began to take shape. not just in the hearth, but in the quiet space between a human who chose to open a door and an orc child who had never been invited to stay before. The workshop felt smaller in daylight. Sunlight filtered through frost-lined windows, catching the floating dust from Rowan's latest carving and turning it briefly golden. Kieran sat at the edge of the hearth rug, the unfinished block of wood still resting in his hands. He hadn't touched the carving tools yet. He held the wood the way someone might hold something fragile, uncertain whether it truly belonged to him. Rowan worked at his bench in steady silence, shaping the curve of a chair leg with slow, practiced strokes. He did not press the boy with questions immediately. He knew enough about grief to understand it did not respond well to interrogation. After a time, Rowan spoke without turning around. "You said your name is Kieran." The boy nodded. "Who gave it to you?" "My mother," Kieran replied quietly. Rowan paused briefly before continuing his work. "It's a good name." Kieran traced his thumb along the smooth surface of the wood. "It means first light, where we come from." Rowan glanced back at him. "That's fitting," he said. Kieran did not smile. Silence returned for several long moments before Rowan set down his tools and turned fully toward the boy. "You walked here alone?" Rowan asked gently. Kieran hesitated. "Yes." "How long?" "I don't know." That answer told Rowan enough. Children who travel in grief measure distance differently. Time stretches when there is nowhere certain to go. "Where did you sleep?" Rowan asked. "Trees. Abandoned sheds. Once in a broken cart." Kieran shrugged faintly. "People shout before I get close." Rowan's jaw tightened. "And your mother?" he asked carefully. Kieran's fingers tightened slightly around the wood. "We were moving north when the fighting ended," he said slowly. "The clans broke apart. There wasn't enough food." His voice remained steady, but something inside it shifted. "She got sick." Rowan did not interrupt. "She told me to keep walking if she stopped breathing." The words hung in the air like frost. Rowan felt the weight of them settle in his chest. "And she stopped," Rowan said softly. Kieran nodded once. There were no tears. Grief had frozen before it could fall. "I buried her under stones," Kieran continued. "So animals wouldn't." He stopped there. Rowan closed his eyes briefly. He had buried someone once too. War did not ask how old you were before it demanded you grow up. "Why south?" Rowan asked after a while. Kieran glanced toward the door. "Because north only had memory," he said. The honesty of it was sharp. Rowan understood that answer better than the boy could know. There were parts of Briar Hollow he avoided too. Corners of the village that reminded him of laughter no longer heard. "Did anyone help you?" Rowan asked. Kieran shook his head. "Not like this." Rowan leaned back against the workbench, studying him carefully. "You don't act like you expect kindness," Rowan observed. Kieran's brow furrowed slightly. "I don't," he said simply. That was not accusation. It was fact shaped by experience. Rowan stepped forward and crouched again, resting his forearms on his knees. "You asked for warmth," he said. "Nothing else." Kieran looked at him. "That's what I needed," he replied. Rowan considered that for a long moment. "Warmth keeps you alive tonight," he said quietly. "But what do you need after that?" Kieran blinked slowly, as if the question had never been asked before. "I don't know," he admitted. Rowan reached out and tapped the block of wood lightly. "You can carve," he said. "Your hands are steady." Kieran glanced down at his fingers, scraped, scarred, but still capable. "My mother used to shape bone tools," he said softly. "She said hands remember even when hearts don't." Rowan nodded. "Then let them remember," he replied. He stood and retrieved a small carving knife, not sharp enough to wound easily, but precise enough for shaping. He placed it in Kieran's palm. The boy stared at it. "You trust me?" Kieran asked quietly. Rowan met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes." The word carried more weight than either of them fully understood yet. Outside, the village continued its low murmurs. Inside, a child who had buried his mother beneath cold stones held something sharp that was not a weapon. He did not yet know what he would carve, but for the first time since walking south through snow and silence, he was not walking alone. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither of them had expected. Snow still lined the edges of the road, but the harshest bite of winter had eased. Rowan rose at dawn as he always did, stoking the fire, sweeping sawdust from the workshop floor, checking the drying planks stacked carefully along the back wall. Kieran woke quietly, never demanding attention, always watching before moving, as though he feared overstepping some invisible boundary. Rowan noticed that. "Eat first," he would say each morning, sliding a bowl of porridge across the table. Kieran obeyed without argument, but he never reached for more than what was given. It took 3 days before Rowan placed a second ladleful in the bowl without asking. Kieran stared at it for a moment. "You're growing," Rowan said simply. "Eat." The boy nodded and did. Outside, whispers in the village had not stopped. Rowan could feel eyes on the workshop whenever he stepped into the square. Conversations quieted when Kieran passed. Children were pulled closer to parents' sides. But something else had begun to happen too. Curiosity. Kieran spent hours at the workbench now, the small carving knife moving cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence. He worked in silence, tongue pressed lightly to the corner of his mouth in concentration. The first piece he attempted was crude, a small, uneven shape that might have been a bird if one squinted kindly. Rowan did not laugh. He examined it carefully, turning it in his calloused hands. "You see movement," Rowan said. "That's good." Kieran looked up, surprised. "It's not finished," the boy said. "Neither are you," Rowan replied. The words lingered between them. That afternoon, Rowan unlocked a small wooden chest that had not been opened in years. The hinges creaked softly as he lifted the lid. Inside lay a set of carving tools wrapped in cloth, well used but carefully maintained. Kieran watched from across the room. "These belong to my son," Rowan said quietly. The air shifted. Kieran lowered his gaze immediately. "I don't need them." Rowan unwrapped the cloth slowly, laying the tools out on the workbench. Chisels of varying widths, a fine gouge, a detail knife worn smooth along its handle. "He used to carve animals," Rowan continued. "Never got the legs quite right." His voice did not break, but it thinned slightly. Kieran stepped closer. "You don't have to," he began. Rowan picked up the smallest chisel and placed it gently in Kieran's hand. "I'm not giving them to replace him," Rowan said evenly. "I'm giving them because hands should build when they can." Kieran's fingers curled slowly around the tool. No one had given him something valuable in a very long time. "Why?" he asked again, not suspicious now, but confused. Rowan met his eyes. "Because you asked for warmth," he said. "And warmth alone isn't enough." Kieran swallowed. Outside, a group of villagers paused near the workshop window, peering in. They saw the Orc Child standing at Rowan's bench, tools laid out before him like inheritance. They did not understand what they were seeing. Inside, Rowan adjusted Kieran's grip on the chisel. "Not like that," he instructed gently. "Let the blade follow the grain." Kieran tried again. Wood curled away in thin, controlled shavings. A shape began to form. Not perfect, not steady yet, but intentional. Rowan stepped back, allowing space. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Dust drifted in sunlit beams. The workshop, once quiet with absence, now carried the soft rhythm of shared work. Kieran did not speak for a long time. Then, quietly, almost to himself, he said, "No one ever let me build before." Rowan did not respond immediately. He simply returned to his own bench and began carving beside him. Two figures working under the same roof. Not bound by blood, not bound by history, bound by something simpler. Choice. Outside, Briar Hollow continued to murmur about risk and memory and old wounds. But inside that small workshop, an orc child who had asked only for warmth had been given something far greater. A future shaped by his own hands. The council met 3 nights later. Word had spread quickly that Rowan Hale had not only sheltered the orc child, but had given him tools, real tools, and work. To some, that felt like compassion. To others, it felt like invitation. The meeting was held in the small stone hall near the chapel, lanterns casting long shadows across wooden benches worn smooth by years of town gatherings. Rowan stood near the center of the room, hands clasped loosely behind his back. He had not brought Kieran. The boy remained in the workshop, carving quietly beside a steady fire. Marta Feld spoke first. "We have all seen the child," she said, "and we have all heard what Rowan intends." A murmur rippled through the room. "He intends nothing beyond shelter and work," Rowan replied calmly. "That is not small," Thomas Alder said from the far bench. His voice no longer carried raw anger, but it held weight. "You are asking the village to accept him." "I am asking the village not to punish him," Rowan corrected. One of the elders leaned forward. "You know what tension remains with the northern clans. There are still skirmishes near the border." "This is not the border," Rowan said. "It could become one." Silence settled briefly. Father Corin stood near the side wall, listening more than speaking. Rowan, Marta continued carefully, people are afraid. They worry others may follow. That your workshop becomes a refuge. Rowan held her gaze. Would that be so terrible? For those who lost sons? Thomas asked quietly. Rowan's jaw tightened slightly. I lost my son, he said. You know that? Thomas did not look away. Yes, he said. And yet, Rowan continued, I will not let that loss turn me into something smaller. The words hung in the lantern-lit air. An older woman in the back spoke up. He is still Orc. He is still child, Rowan answered. A few villagers shifted uncomfortably. Do you guarantee he will not bring trouble? Another asked. I guarantee nothing, Rowan said honestly, except that I will answer for him as long as he stands under my roof. That caught attention. You would take responsibility? Marta asked. Yes. If he steals, I repay. If he fights, I restrain. If others come seeking him, I face them. The certainty in his voice was not loud, but it was firm. Thomas studied him carefully. And what if the village votes for him to leave? Rowan did not hesitate. Then you vote to exile me as well. The room went still. Father Corin stepped forward at last. We are not choosing between safety and danger, he said quietly. We are choosing between fear and judgment. No one responded immediately. Thomas looked toward the floor, then back at Rowan. I don't trust him, he admitted. I don't ask you to, Rowan replied. I ask you not to condemn him. Marta folded her hands together tightly. He stays through winter, she said slowly. Under your word. He stays, Rowan confirmed. And in spring, someone asked. In spring, Rowan answered. We will judge by what he has done, not what we fear. The council did not applaud. It did not fully agree. But it did not demand the boy's removal. That was enough for now. When Rowan returned to the workshop, he found Kieran seated at the bench, small curls of wood gathered at his feet. The boy looked up immediately. Are we leaving? He asked quietly. Rowan stepped inside and closed the door against the night. No, he said. Kieran searched his face carefully, as though looking for the hidden truth behind the word. You defended me, the boy said. I defended fairness, Rowan replied. Kieran's hands tightened around the carving knife. I won't cause trouble, he promised. Rowan moved closer and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. You don't have to earn air, he said gently. Just live well in it. Outside, the village settled into uneasy quiet. Inside, the fire burned steady. The pushback had not vanished, but neither had the choice. And sometimes standing firm is louder than shouting. Kieran returned to his carving, the blade moving more confidently now. He was no longer just asking for warmth. He was learning how to stay. It happened on a morning that felt almost ordinary. The snow had begun to melt in uneven patches, revealing strips of brown earth between white drifts. Market stalls reopened more regularly as winter loosened its grip. Rowan had sent Kieran ahead with a small list: flour, lamp oil, and a spool of twine, along with enough coin to cover the cost. You go alone? Kieran asked, surprised. Rowan met his eyes steadily. Yes. The boy hesitated only a moment before nodding. Walking into the village square, without Rowan beside him, felt heavier than carrying tools. Eyes followed him immediately, some curious, some guarded. But no one stopped him. The baker weighed flour without comment. The blacksmith nodded once, brief but not hostile. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Then a shout cut across the square. Someone's taken from my stall. Heads turned toward the dried goods merchant near the well. Small sacks of salted meat lay scattered across the ground. A crate had been opened, contents disturbed. I had 3 more this morning, the merchant insisted. 3. Murmurs rippled outward. Kieran felt it instantly, the shift in air, the narrowing of eyes. He was just here, someone said quietly. All at once, the square seemed smaller. I didn't, Kieran began, but his voice faltered under the weight of attention. Thomas stepped forward slowly. Did you see anyone near the stall? He asked, not accusing, but direct. Kieran swallowed. He had. Earlier, he'd noticed a human youth lingering near the merchant's crates, older than him, thin-faced, quick movements. The boy had slipped something beneath his coat before disappearing behind the chapel. Kieran had seen it, but speaking now would not feel like defense. It would feel like betrayal, and betrayal was something he understood too well. I was buying flour, Kieran said carefully. That's not an answer, the merchant snapped. The crowd tightened slightly. Kieran felt heat rise beneath his skin, not from anger, but from memory. Closed doors. Raised voices. Hands ready to shove. Check his pockets, someone muttered. Rowan's voice cut through the gathering before the suggestion could take shape. No one touches him. He moved into the square with steady strides, positioning himself beside Kieran without hesitation. What happened? Rowan asked calmly. The merchant explained quickly, frustration clear in his tone. And you believe he took it? Rowan asked. He was here, the merchant insisted. So were 20 others, Rowan replied. Marta folded her arms. This is what we feared. Rowan looked down at Kieran. Did you take anything? He asked quietly. Kieran met his gaze. No. Rowan did not look away. Then I stand with that, he said. The crowd murmured again. And if he lies? The merchant challenged. Then I repay you twice over, Rowan answered. But you will not accuse without proof. The weight of his words steadied the air slightly. Thomas looked around the square. Who else was near the stall? Silence answered at first. Then, slowly, a smaller voice spoke from behind the well. I saw Darren there, a young girl said hesitantly. Heads turned. Darren, the miller's son, stood near the edge of the crowd, face pale. I didn't, he began. Thomas's gaze sharpened. Open your coat. Darren hesitated. That was enough. Thomas stepped forward and pulled the coat aside. 2 small sacks of salted meat fell to the ground. Silence crashed over the square. The merchant stared. Darren's face flushed red. I was going to return it, he muttered weakly. No one believed that. The crowd shifted again, this time not toward Kieran, but away from him. Rowan placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. You knew? Rowan asked quietly. Kieran nodded once. Why didn't you say? Kieran's voice dropped low. If I accused him, it would look like I was protecting myself. Rowan understood immediately. The fear of being believed only when useful. Thomas looked at Kieran for a long moment. You could have spoken, he said. Yes, Kieran replied. But you didn't lie. Kieran shook his head. Thomas turned toward the merchant. You owe him apology. The merchant swallowed hard. He stepped forward awkwardly. I was wrong. Kieran nodded once. Not triumphant. Just steady. As the crowd dispersed, murmurs shifted again, softer now, reflective rather than sharp. Rowan walked beside Kieran back toward the workshop. You don't have to stay silent when you're innocent, Rowan said gently. Kieran glanced up. I didn't want to make it worse. Rowan considered that. You didn't, he said. Inside the workshop, the fire burned low but steady. Outside, something had changed again, not loudly, not dramatically. But the village had seen a moment where fear could have decided. And it hadn't. Belonging is not granted in comfort. It is tested in suspicion. And that day, Kieran had stood without running. And Rowan had stood without wavering. The village had noticed. After the market incident, the air in Briar Hollow shifted in ways too subtle to name but too real to ignore. People no longer stared at Kieran with open suspicion. They watched him instead with something quieter, assessment, perhaps, or reluctant reconsideration. Darren's theft had unsettled more than one assumption. Fear had pointed quickly in one direction, and it had been wrong. Inside the workshop, Kieran worked longer than usual that week. He did not speak much. Rowan did not push him to. Wood shavings gathered in soft spirals around his boots as he carved with steady, deliberate strokes. His movements were no longer hesitant. The grain bent beneath his hands as though recognizing purpose. What are you making? Rowan asked one evening, watching from across the bench. Kieran did not answer immediately. Something that feels true, he said at last. Rowan nodded and let him continue. Outside, early spring crept slowly into the village. Snow receded to the edges of fences. Birds returned cautiously to bare branches. The world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what this fragile new season might bring. 3 days later, Kieran placed the finished carving on the workbench. It was small, no taller than Rowan's hand. 2 children stood side by side, hands clasped. One bore the subtle curve of tusks. The other did not. Their faces were simple but unmistakably gentle. Rowan stared at it for a long moment. You carved us, he said quietly. Kieran shook his head. I carved what I wished to see, he replied. Rowan felt something tighten in his chest. The lines were imperfect in places, the proportions slightly uneven. But the meaning was clear. It was not a symbol of victory, not a declaration, just connection. May I? Rowan asked. Kieran nodded. Rowan carried the carving into the village square that afternoon and set it gently on the edge of the baker's stall where sunlight caught its shape clearly. People noticed. At first, they only glanced. Then they paused. Thomas approached slowly, folding his arms as he studied the small wooden figures. "He made this?" he asked. "Yes," Rowan replied. Thomas crouched slightly, examining the detail in the carved hands. "They're holding on," he observed. "Yes." Thomas stood without comment and moved away. Later, Marta lifted the carving carefully and turned it in her hands. "It's simple," she said. "It is," Rowan agreed. She set it back down, not dismissively, but thoughtfully. By evening, 3 more villagers had stopped to look. Children pointed at it openly. "Why are they holding hands?" one asked. "Because they can," another answered. The carving remained in the square overnight. No one removed it. No one damaged it. The next morning, Rowan found something new beside it. A small wreath of woven straw, human-made, placed carefully around the figures. No note, no announcement, just presence. When Rowan brought the carving back to the workshop, Kieran looked at him carefully. "They didn't break it," the boy said quietly. "No," Rowan replied. Kieran's shoulders eased slightly, a tension he hadn't known he carried beginning to loosen. "You didn't ask me to show it," Rowan added. "I wanted to," Kieran said. "Why?" The boy hesitated. "Because if they only see me," he said, "they remember the war." Rowan listened closely. "But if they see this," Kieran continued softly, "maybe they remember something else." Rowan placed the carving back onto the bench with careful hands. "Would last longer than words," he said. Kieran allowed himself a small, uncertain smile. Outside, Briar Hollow continued its cautious transition into spring. Inside, a child who had once asked only for warmth had given something unexpected in return. Not apology, not proof, but possibility shaped from grain and patience. And sometimes, that is the truth people need to see before they are ready to believe it. The carving did not stay in the square by accident. The morning after it first appeared, Rowan found it moved. Not discarded, not hidden, but placed carefully in the chapel window where sunlight passed through the thin glass and lit the joined hands in gold. He had not put it there. Neither had Kieran. Father Corin stood nearby when Rowan stepped inside. "It seemed appropriate," the priest said quietly. Rowan looked at the small wooden figures framed by morning light. "It wasn't meant as sermon," he replied. "Most truth isn't," Father Corin answered. Word spread quickly that the Orc boys' carving now stood inside sacred walls. Some grumbled. Others came to look. Thomas lingered longer than most. He did not kneel. He did not pray. He simply stood and studied the detail in the hands. That afternoon, a small human child approached the workshop alone. "Are you the one who made the statue?" she asked Kieran directly. Kieran stiffened at first, glancing toward Rowan. Rowan nodded gently. "Yes," Kieran said. "Can you make one with a dog?" the girl asked. Kieran blinked. "A dog? With big ears," she clarified seriously. Kieran looked at Rowan, uncertain whether this was mockery. Rowan smiled faintly. "Sounds like a commission." The girl grinned and ran off. By evening, 2 more children had wandered near the workshop, peering curiously inside. They did not cross the threshold, but they did not retreat either. Kieran returned to the bench and began carving again. This time not from memory, not from grief, but from request. Rowan watched him carefully. "You see what's happening?" Rowan asked quietly. Kieran did not look up. "They want something." "Yes." "That doesn't mean they trust me." "No," Rowan agreed. "But they're willing to ask." That was new. Later that week, Marta approached the workshop with hesitant steps. "I heard you carve," she said, not looking directly at Kieran. "He does," Rowan replied. Marta shifted awkwardly. "My grandson, he likes horses." Kieran met her eyes carefully. "I can try," he said. Marta nodded once. "I'll pay." Rowan shook his head gently. "Not yet." Marta frowned slightly. "Let him carve first," Rowan clarified. "Then decide its worth." She studied Kieran one long moment before leaving. The workshop filled with the steady rhythm of shaping wood. Days passed. Small carvings began to appear around the village. A dog with oversized ears, a tiny horse with slightly uneven legs, a simple bird perched mid-flight. None were perfect. All were intentional. Children carried them openly. Parents did not take them away. One afternoon, Thomas stepped into the workshop unannounced. Kieran froze instinctively. Thomas removed his hat slowly. "I was wrong at the market," he said, voice low. Kieran swallowed. "You were afraid?" he replied. Thomas nodded once. "Fear doesn't excuse it," he said. Silence held steady. Thomas glanced toward the carving bench. You carved the figures holding hands. Yes. Thomas exhaled slowly. My son carved once. The admission was quiet, almost reluctant. He wasn't very good, Thomas added faintly. Kieran's lips twitched slightly before he could stop himself. I'm not either, he said. Thomas looked at him carefully. You're learning, he replied. He left without further words. That night, Rowan placed another log on the fire and sat across from Kieran. You asked for warmth, Rowan said softly. Kieran nodded. You have it. Kieran glanced toward the window where faint lights from the village flickered. Yes. But you're giving them something back, Rowan continued. Kieran frowned slightly. I'm just carving. Rowan shook his head gently. No, he said. You're giving them something greater. Kieran tilted his head, confused. Not heat, Rowan clarified. Not shelter. He gestured toward the small figures lined along the bench. You're giving them a future they didn't imagine. Kieran sat quietly with that. Outside, Briar Hollow no longer whispered when he passed. It did not cheer either, but it did something more important. It stayed. And so did he. Spring arrived without announcement. One morning the frost simply did not return, and Briar Hollow awoke beneath open sky instead of gray cloud. The road softened. Market stalls expanded. Doors remained open longer than they closed. Kieran stood outside the workshop watching children chase each other across the square, one of his carved birds tucked carefully into a coat pocket. No one looked twice at him anymore. Some even waved. He did not know what to do with that. Rowan joined him, wiping sawdust from his hands onto a cloth. You've been quiet, Rowan observed. Kieran nodded faintly. When the snow melts, Kieran said slowly, people travel again. Yes, Rowan replied. And when people travel, they remember who belongs. Rowan studied him carefully. You think you don't? Kieran did not answer immediately. I was supposed to keep walking, he said at last. My mother said if she stopped breathing, I should keep going. Rowan felt the weight of that settle between them. She told you to survive, Rowan said gently. Yes. And have you? Kieran hesitated. Yes. Rowan nodded once. Then you honored her. Silence stretched softly. But surviving isn't the same as staying, Kieran added. Rowan leaned against the fence post beside him. No, he agreed. It isn't. Kieran watched Thomas help rebuild a smaller storage shed near the edge of town. Marta handed bread directly to a passing child. Father Corin spoke with travelers at the well without tension in his posture. The village no longer felt like a storm waiting to close its doors. But that did not mean it felt like home. I don't know where I'm meant to be, Kieran admitted quietly. Rowan looked at him fully then. You're meant to choose, he said. Kieran frowned slightly. No one has ever asked me to choose, he replied. Then I am, Rowan said. He took a slow breath before continuing. I won't send you away when summer comes. Kieran's eyes widened slightly. You won't. No. But the council. I spoke to them, Rowan interrupted gently. You've done nothing but build. They see that. Kieran looked toward the workshop, toward the tools laid carefully along the bench. You don't have to stay, Rowan added. If you wish to walk again, I won't stop you. The words were steady. No demand. No pressure. Kieran's throat tightened unexpectedly. You would let me go? He asked. Yes. Even after, he stopped himself. After I opened the door? Rowan finished quietly. Yes. Rowan considered that carefully. I opened the door because you knocked, he said. I kept it open because you chose well inside it. Kieran stared at the ground for a long moment. My mother never trusted humans, he said softly. She had reason, Rowan replied. And you had reason not to trust me. I did. Kieran looked up sharply. And I chose anyway, Rowan said. The simplicity of it struck deeper than any argument. Choice. Not obligation. Not guilt. Not charity. Kieran looked toward the chapel window where the small carving of joined hands still stood. Then toward the children laughing in the square. Then back to the workshop, to wood and tools and steady firelight. I don't want to keep walking, he said at last. Rowan did not smile widely. He simply nodded. Then stay. Kieran swallowed. As what? He asked quietly. Rowan stepped closer. As my apprentice, he said first. Then, after a brief pause. And as my son, if you wish it. The world seemed to still for a heartbeat. Kieran's breath caught. He had buried one parent beneath cold stones. He had not expected another to stand in front of him and choose him freely. You don't have to say yes today, Rowan added gently. Kieran shook his head. Yes, he said, voice barely above whisper. Rowan rested a hand on his shoulder. Firm, steady, real. Outside, Briar Hollow continued into spring. Inside that small moment, something rooted deeper than warmth. Kieran had asked for fire against the cold. What he had been offered was something greater, a place to belong, and he had chosen it. Years later, people in Briar Hollow would still speak of the winter storm, but not for the snow. They would remember the knock. By the time summer settled fully across the fields, Rowan's workshop no longer felt like a quiet, solitary place. The door stood open most afternoons. The scent of cedar and pine drifted out into the road, mingling with fresh bread and sun-warmed earth. Inside, the steady rhythm of carving had become familiar to more than 2 pairs of hands. Kieran stood taller now. His shoulders had broadened, his hands stronger, movements precise and confident. The carving knife no longer felt foreign in his grip. He worked with the ease of someone who belonged at the bench. Rowan watched him often without saying so. Not with pride that boasted, but with the quiet satisfaction of something restored. The first time a human child and an orc child sat side by side inside the workshop, it had been awkward. They'd avoided looking directly at each other, each pretending to focus entirely on their wood blocks. But what is patient? It gives hands something to do while walls lower slowly. Soon, the workshop became a place where children came not to question, but to learn. Some parents hovered near the doorway at first, uncertain. Others lingered outside, listening. No one pulled their children away. Thomas's daughter carved a small horse with uneven legs and held it up proudly. Kieran corrected her grip gently, just as Rowan had once corrected his. "Let the blade follow the grain," he said softly. The words felt like inheritance. One afternoon, a traveler passed through Briar Hollow and paused near the chapel window where the small carving of joined hands still rested. Time had smoothed its edges slightly. Sunlight had deepened the wood's tone. "Who made that?" the traveler asked. "A boy who once asked for warmth," Father Corin replied. The traveler studied the carving carefully. "It looks like hope," he said. Father Corin nodded. "It is." Back at the workshop, Rowan leaned against the doorframe, watching Kieran guide 2 younger children through shaping a simple bird. His voice was patient, his hands steady. There was no trace of the trembling boy who had once stood barefoot in a snowstorm. Rowan stepped inside quietly. "You've outgrown my tools," he said lightly. Kieran glanced up with a small smile. "No," he replied. "I've grown into them." Rowan considered that. "Yes," he agreed. As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden light across the workshop floor, Kieran set down his carving and approached Rowan. "You kept the door open," Kieran said. Rowan shook his head gently. "You walked through it," he answered. Outside, laughter drifted in from the square. The village no longer whispered when Kieran passed. They called his name, not as novelty, not as exception, simply as neighbor. That night, as lanterns glowed softly across Briar Hollow, Rowan added another log to the hearth. The fire crackled, warm, steady, enduring. Kieran stood beside him, watching the flames. "I asked for warmth," he said quietly. Rowan nodded. "And you gave me a life?" Kieran continued. Rowan looked at him carefully. "No," he said. "You built it." The fire did not burn brighter because of applause or celebration. It burned because it was fed, log by log, choice by choice. Years from now, children would hear the story of the coldest night when an orc child knocked on a human's door. They would think the miracle was that the door opened. But those who truly remembered knew better. The miracle was not the warmth of the fire. It was the courage to let it last.